Ever since World War II, there's been a contingent of fascists who wish to take over the government. Some have leaned towards Nazism, some have leaned towards totalitarianism or authoritarianism. Some are simply extreme right-wing. Some, white supremacists. Some are all of the above. And there are amongst them those people who also want Trump to win. They know that Kamala Harris will not achieve their agenda and will resist it, but that Trump will go along with it whether he believes it or not. That's immaterial to him. They have tried to destabilize the government because that makes the government vulnerable to overthrow. This is ongoing. There is no period where the extreme right-wing fascists are content with the government. Trump will try to please them, but they will probably be disappointed by him or not wait for him, but use him to change the country, which has always been teetering once and for all. At one time, the class struggle was simply the ideological battle and occasional real battle between the working classes and the ruling classes. But we have watched this shift from exploitation of the masses to the alienating and fragmenting of the masses through identity politics. This has led to women, blacks, gays, and other minority groups splintering, so that we now have many groups of oppressed with sometimes very different agendas. Terrorism arises out of state violence. That's what we will see in a new Trump administration. And they will keep these groups separate, so they will turn on each other for prominence and dominance in the pursuit of rights. Unless all the oppressed support all the oppressed, then you will continue to have a splintering, which makes the individual groups more vulnerable. Look at the Palestinian cause. While many of these oppressed groups sympathize with the Palestinian cause, they are not motivated enough to join and make it stronger. Is that an American phenomena? If this was an American problem, would it be different? Until that changes, the state has no motivation to shift its agenda as it was forced to do in Vietnam. Vietnam was unique in that it was happening overseas, but affected young Americans very directly. Is it wiser to fight for gun laws, or to arm the oppressed as the radical right-wing white supremacist groups and militias have done? And can this be done above board, or must it be done illegally? How many of the guns of the white supremacists are legal arms with no modifications? And they are allowed to operate quite openly, until again a small splinter group, smaller and smaller, takes it to the next level and attempts a coup. This is also unacceptable to the state and their cherished status quo, even though the state is far more tolerant of the white majority. During the 70s, there was a global radical left-wing movement. Every country had organizations known to the government, the media, and the people, and they carried on political violence in response to state violence. But for a variety of reasons, some external, some internal, as well as a changing world, they were destroyed and replaced with imaginary organizations like Antifa that were used to demonize leftist political action. And because the propaganda and conditioning has been so insidiously effective, it has primarily worked, scaring and alienating even those that might be sympathetic. As long as the American government is considered to have some degree of legitimacy, it will be almost impossible to mount any sort of significant violent resistance to it from the very people who need to rise up. But that can all change with Trump. Most radical, violent white supremacist groups are rural, and rural guerrillas have historically had more success, very much due to the terrain and environment. Rural environments are vast, hard to navigate, and easier to hide and regroup, as opposed to the urban guerrilla movement. Think of New York or Chicago or LA. Think of how hard it is to get around just to go shopping or get to work. Think of the police presence. Success in urban areas has come more easily when individuals, a Kaczynski or a McVeigh, carry out the actions alone rather than in groups, even if they are supported and abetted by others. Urban guerrillas, individuals, can only strike and retreat. They cannot generally parlay their political violence into territorial or political gains. The problem with urban guerrillas is if they are successful and their movement grows and becomes a mass movement, it is harder to be clandestine and easier to infiltrate and undermine and destroy. This is why you will always see informants within the ranks of urban guerrillas, and why it is much harder to destroy a rural guerrilla movement. Security technology and the stripping away of rights and freedoms through legislation has made it increasingly difficult for radical groups to carry out their political agenda. Buying or stealing arms, infiltrating government buildings, etc., has become almost impossible without detection. As a society, we have given away our freedoms for security, and most seem to prefer that trade-off. Budgets were increased, sophisticated and subtle tactics were developed, including media manipulation, and an entire security and intelligence industry working in sync with the government evolved. Repression increased, but most never noticed. During the 60s and 70s, when civil rights came to the forefront, a professional managerial class was created or emerged, a liberal bureaucracy in government to protect those rights. And that seemed like a good and pure idea at the time. But over time, they became just another tool of capitalism, swallowed up by the system, dedicated to maintaining the power structure of the status quo while protecting themselves and their existence, and as a result, the working class just became an empty phrase. Now, part of the absurdity of this is, who is the working class? We've discovered that the working class has many ethnicities, races, levels of income and poverty, and can't be generalized about. We know that many in the so-called working class support the merchant elite, like Trump and Musk, who are merely the frontmen for the real elites who control all the money and decisions in this country and most of the world, like BlackRock and Vanguard. It's ironic because the political theorists who observe this phenomenon and label it the professional managerial class and who talk about the working class are academic elites who have absolutely no connection to the working class, weren't raised amongst them, don't hang out with them, don't know any actual working class, so there is a certain condescension to their assessments. What do you think is going to happen if Trump deploys troops against protesters on domestic soil? You think that will go smoothly? Or will there be violence? Do you think parents will stand by and watch their children be killed for their beliefs? Ironically, nothing may bring this country together faster than employing violence against their own citizens. Soldiers will be killed. Students will be killed. Innocent bystanders will be killed. Even if Kamala Harris wins, there will be violence. But violence by a small group of people who are disgruntled and resentful is different, no less potentially devastating, but different, than the military inflicting violence as a policy. Violence or violence? That seems to be our choice.